43 minutes. That is the number. Not the full flight time, not the duration of a full orbit, just the span of time between the moment Orion slams into the top of the atmosphere at 24,500 miles per hour and the moment it splashes down in the Pacific. 43 minutes where the vehicle is a hot knife cutting through stone. 43 minutes where the crew is alone. Completely alone. NASA calls it the communications blackout. The technical term is ray-entry plasma sheath. It's a phrase so sterile, it sounds like a piece of bad lab equipment. The reality is a Faraday cage made of screaming gas. As the heat shield compresses nitrogen and oxygen atoms against its ablative surface, the kinetic energy, roughly 32,000 megajoules, ionizes the air envelope. You are inside a light bulb filament that doesn't know it's a light bulb. The public sees the smooth animation. Orion hits the entry interface. A clean cone of fire, then static, then a cheerful voice from Houston confirming S-band reacquisition. The crew sees the color of a broken television, according to telemetry analysis of Artemis I from the Orion entry monitor system, specifically the Langmuir probes mounted near the back shell. The plasma density during peak heating spikes to roughly 10 to 12 electrons per cubic centimeter. That's dense enough to reflect or absorb every frequency NASA can throw at it. S-band, Q-band, dead. The data, published just last October in a dry paper on hypersonic aerothermodynamics, shows a 14 magnitude drop in signal. That's not a dimming. That's an erasure. Here is what the screens inside the cabin will show. Nothing. The downlink is severed. The uplink is gone. The inertial measurement unit is still spinning gyros, but the outside world has vanished. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen will be strapped into seats designed for impact, watching the windows glow. You think you know what fire looks like. You've lit a match. You've seen a bonfire. This is not fire. This is dissociation. The nitrogen molecules outside are being ripped apart into single atoms. The light spectrum peaking at 7,000 Kelvin. That's not yellow or orange. That's a blue-white so intense it has weight. And it's silent. The vehicle structure groans. The thrusters fire autonomously, fighting the lift vector to keep the skip trajectory from becoming a ballistic tomb. But the crew can't talk to anyone about it. Not to Houston. Not to each other, really. Not with the vibration-rattling fillings loose. Here is the question I cannot stop turning over. If you were strapped into that seat, knowing the heat shield is holding, but seeing that light, a light so unnatural it triggers the part of the lizard brain that screams run, would you keep your eyes open? Would you stare into the plasma, knowing you are an organic object trapped inside a physics experiment? Or would you close them? Would you retreat into the black of your own skull to escape the black of the ionized void outside? Tell me in the comments. I am not asking for engagement metrics. I am asking because the sensory deprivation combined with sensory overload is a combination the human mind has no manual for. We've sent machines through this, unmanned. They don't have retinas to scorch or inner ears to confuse. We know the heat shield works. The avcoat tiles ablate perfectly. The parachutes deploy. The math is solid. The engineering is a triumph of grit and titanium. But the silence? The 2,580 seconds where 4 people are the only conscious observers of their own violent transformation from orbital velocity to sea level? That's the edge we haven't touched yet. Artemis I gave us the numbers. It gave us the plasma frequency shift. It didn't give us the sound of a heartbeat in a white-hot coffin. If you value information that doesn't flinch from the void, now would be the time to subscribe. We're the channel that shows you the edges. We're the ones looking past the press release photos of smiling astronauts in clean suits to the moment the glass turns to lava. The silence is not empty. The plasma sheath isn't just a wall for voices. It's a lens. As Orion punches through the upper mesosphere, roughly 75 kilometers up, The ionized boundary layer begins to shimmer, not with heat, with instability. The flow field transitions from laminar to turbulent in milliseconds. The craft isn't cutting air, it's being chewed by it. Artemis I carried a suite of sensors we rarely talk about. The Sifley team from NASA Langley deployed a high-altitude WB-57 aircraft to catch Orion during the blackout. They pointed a special camera called a hyperspectral imaging sensor at the incoming fireball. What they captured wasn't the smooth teardrop shape you see in renders. It was a chaotic, pulsing wake. The plasma tail oscillated at 12 Hz. 12 times a second, the entire envelope around the capsule buckled and reformed. 12 Hz is not an arbitrary number. It's the same frequency as a human's alpha brainwave rhythm. It's the electrical hum of a mind at rest with eyes closed. Inside the cabin, the crew will feel this oscillation. Not as vibration through the seat, the dampeners absorb that. They'll feel it in their vestibular canals. The fluid in your inner ear doesn't care about rubber shock mounts. It responds to acceleration vectors. The lateral G loads during skip entry are not constant. They're a jagged, sawtooth graph. The body reads this as a lie. Victor Glover is a test pilot. He's flown FA-18s through carrier landings where the world compresses into a pinprick of green light on a Fresnel lens. Christina Koch spent 328 days on the IS, where up and down are a polite fiction. None of that prepares the semicircular canals for this specific jagged shove. The brainstem will interpret the 12 Hz buffet as falling. Not flying, falling. The primitive part of the cortex will flood the bloodstream with norepinephrine. The heart will try to punch through the sternum. Here's the engineering analogy. Think of a bridge in a high wind. The Tacoma Narrows didn't collapse from brute force. It collapsed from aeroelastic flutter, a feedback loop between structure and fluid. Orion's heat shield is experiencing the same thing, just at Mach 32. The difference is the bridge had no passengers inside its hollow steel chambers. Another question then. You're inside. The windows are a color your optic nerve was not calibrated to receive. Your inner ear is screaming that you're tumbling toward a granite slab at terminal velocity. The rational part of you, the part that passed the psyche vals and memorized the abort procedures, knows the numbers. You know the skip trajectory puts you at 4.2 Gs, well within survival limits. But the body doesn't speak in G-force decimals. The body speaks in ancient, non-verbal terror. Do you trust the engineering? Or do you, in that 43-minute vacuum of data, begin to hallucinate a different ending? Put it in the comments. I read them because the answers are a data set themselves. We study the aluminum. We study the avcoat. We forget to study the mind that has to sit inside the aluminum while the avcoat burns. And the worst part hasn't even started yet. Because at T plus 21 minutes of blackout, the vehicle does something the brain categorically rejects as suicide. It dives. On purpose, the vehicle goes up. At T plus 19 minutes of blackout, Orion's guidance computer executes the skip entry maneuver. The lift vector shifts. The capsule, still wrapped in a shroud of ionized nitrogen, pitches nose up and climbs. Altitude increases from 200,000 feet to 240,000 feet. The plasma cools. The windows go from white to orange to a deep, smoldering crimson. For the first time in nearly 20 minutes, the crew can see the curvature of the Earth. It is a reprieve. It is also a lie. The skip is not a glitch. It is a designed trajectory to bleed off the velocity left over from a lunar return without pulping the occupants. But the brainstem does not understand trajectory design. It understands pattern recognition. And the pattern reads as the danger has passed. The heart rate drops. The adrenal cascade, which had been a fire hose for a third of an hour, begins to metabolize. Muscles slacken against the 5-point harness. There is a single, blissful moment of quiet where the only sound is the low hum of the environmental control system. Then the LD ratio flips negative. The vehicle rolls over. And it dives again. This second plunge is worse. Not because the G load is higher, it peaks at 4.0 Gs, well within the Apollo 11 benchmark of 6.5 Gs. but because the mind had just been tricked into believing the worst was over. The second entry interface is a betrayal. The plasma sheath reforms with a ferocity that the first encounter lacked. The thermal protection system is already soaked. The char layer on the avcoat has off-gassed. The second wave of heat hits a shield that is no longer pristine. There is a specific moment inside this second dive that no public affairs officer will ever discuss. It occurs when Orion drops back below 200,000 feet. The communication blackout resumes. But this time, the crew knows exactly what is coming. They have a full three-dimensional memory of the sound, the light, the bone-deep vibration. The anticipation is a separate and distinct form of stress. In 2025, the Journal of Aerospace Medicine and Human Performance published a study titled Psychophysiological Anticipatory Response to Repeated G-Force Onset in a Centrifuge Environment. The paper was dry, the implications were not. Subjects who underwent a simulated skip re-entry profile, a brief 1.2 G baseline followed by a 4 G onset, exhibited a 22% spike in salivary cortisol before the second onset. The body was bracing. Preparing for a fall it had already experienced once. Now remove the centrifuge, remove the medical staff and the big red stop button. Place the subject inside a cone of fire, moving at Mach 25, with no voice from the ground. That 22% cortisol spike becomes a conservative estimate. Jeremy Hansen, the Canadian mission specialist seated in the commander's left seat, will be the one monitoring the auxiliary displays. His job during this phase is to verify the guidance alignment. A manual task, fine motor control, fingers on a touchscreen. The same hands that will be trembling from a chemical dump designed by evolution to sprint from a saber tooth, not to toggle through menu options on a glass panel. This is where the data runs out and the speculation begins. We have the telemetry. We have the thermocouple readings from the back shell. We do not have a single byte of data on what 4 human beings will say to each other during the second dive. Will they joke, as Apollo crews did, to bleed off the terror? That was a real barn burner. Or will the cabin go silent, each person retreating into a private war with their own amygdala? If you value information that sits at this uncomfortable intersection of engineering and human fragility, now is the time to subscribe. We do not make videos about space as a backdrop for awe. We make videos about space as a crucible. And this channel runs on the understanding that the crucible does not care if you break. The second dive ends. The plasma goes dark. The drogue parachutes mortar out at 25,000 feet. But the thing waiting at the bottom of that dive is not relief. It's the sound the drogues deploy. 3 mortar blasts. Not loud so much as felt. A thud transmitted through the pressure hull like a kick to a wooden door. The capsule jerks, rotates, stabilizes. The windows are no longer windows. They are opaque discs of charred ablative residue. The crew cannot see the ocean. They cannot see the sky. They are inside a sealed container that smells of scorched phenolic resin and recycled oxygen. The odor is industrial, metallic, wrong. Then the mains cut loose. 3 enormous nylon rings pop at 8,000 feet, and the descent rate bleeds from terminal to something resembling a bad elevator ride. 15 feet per second. Survivable. The crew braces for the moment Apollo veterans described as a minor car crash. Orion hits the Pacific at roughly 17 miles per hour. It's not gentle. It's not violent. It's just a full stop after a sequence of events that defies the nervous system's ability to catalog trauma. Here is the detail the mission transcripts will not capture. The silence after splashdown lasts anywhere from 4 to 7 minutes. The capsule bobs. The uprighting system inflates 5 bright orange balloons to keep the hatch above the waterline. The crew is safe. The rescue teams are inbound. The world exhales. But the body does not exhale. Not yet. The endocrine system has been marinating in cortisol and epinephrine for 43 minutes. The sudden absence of G-force, vibration, and plasma light creates a physiological vacuum. It's called sympathetic rebound. The parasympathetic nervous system slams the brakes. Hard. Heart rate plummets. Blood pressure drops. Nausea rises. The body, finally permitted to process what just happened to it, does not process it well. In 2024, the Human Research Program at JSC conducted a small, quiet study on post-mission orthostatic intolerance after long-duration bed rest combined with simulated re-entry profiles. The findings were not headline material, but one line in the appendix caught my attention. Subjects reported a persistent sense of unreality lasting between 2 and 6 hours after the final g-onset. They described the world as thin, as if the barrier between themselves and the physics they had just endured had not fully reformed. Now place that finding onto a crew that just transited the Earth's atmosphere inside a screaming plasma sheath, a crew that watched the color of a dying star press against triple pane glass, a crew that fell, climbed, and fell again while cut off from every voice in the universe except the ones inside their own helmets. When the hatch opens and the Navy divers give a thumbs up through the window, what does that crew see? Not just faces, they see organisms that have not been burned. Organisms that spent the last 43 minutes breathing salt air while 4 other organisms breathed the smoke of their own shield. There is a term the engineers use for the post-flight debrief. It's called the anomaly review. But the anomaly isn't in the avionics or the thermal tiles. The anomaly is that 4 people will walk off the recovery ship in perfect physical health and spend the rest of their lives trying to find a way to describe a color that doesn't exist on the surface of the planet. And they will fail, because the language for what happens inside a communications blackout at Mach 32 does not belong to the species that invented it. It belongs to the vehicle. And the vehicle never speaks. Subscribe if you want to be here when we finally learn what they saw, because when those 4 voices come back online, they will not tell us the truth. They will tell us what the truth became after 43 minutes of silence. The water is warm. The sun is bright. The recovery ship is half a mile out. And the crew is still falling.